13 nights, 13 consecutive nights of American military strikes against Iran. And we are potentially just getting warmed up. The United States Central Command has now completed its 13th straight night of hitting Iranian military targets, command centers, drone facilities, communications networks, maritime capabilities, 13 nights in a row. And President Trump is out there talking about a massive attack, his word, massive, bigger than anything we have seen yet, as Tehran sits there and rejects a ceasefire. Now, you are not going to hear much about this from the drive-by media, my friends, because it doesn't fit the narrative they've been selling you for 25 years, that America is the bully, that we provoke, that we escalate, that we are the problem. They much prefer the version of events where Iran is a reasonable actor and we just need to sit down and talk and find common ground over a nice plate of hummus. Common ground. With the regime that has been funding terror networks across the Middle East for 4 decades, sure, let's find the common ground. And then, separately, but on the same day, the mayor of New York City, a man named Zohran Mamdani, a man who has been described quite generously, I think, as a democratic socialist. This man is out here celebrating a new tax on wealthy New Yorkers' second homes, while a Jewish man is sitting on the sidewalk of the Upper West Side, clutching a wound in his chest after allegedly being stabbed by a man who shouted Allahu Akbar. And what does Mayor Mamdani say? He says the NYPD's initial investigation suggests mental health may be a factor. Mental health. Folks, we have a lot to get into today. I'm Rick LeBow, this is Rush Hour, and we are just getting started. "13 nights. Let me just sit with that for a moment, because I want you to really let that land. When Barack Obama, Barry as I used to call him, when Barry was in the Oval Office and Iran was doing Iran things, we sent them a strongly worded letter and a pallet of cash. Remember the pallet of cash? $1.7 billion in the middle of the night on a plane to the regime in Tehran. And the media told us this was masterful diplomacy. Donald Trump sends the United States military, and the result is 13 consecutive nights of strikes on Iranian military infrastructure, with more potentially on the way. That is what a different doctrine looks like. You may agree with it, you may have questions about it. I have some thoughts myself, but there is no confusion about what America's posture is right now. And I promise you, that confusion, that strategic ambiguity that previous administrations cultivated like it was a garden, that is what gets people killed. Clarity saves lives. Now, here is what we know from the reporting. CENTCOM has been hitting military command centers, drone production and storage facilities, communications nodes, and maritime capabilities. These are not random targets. This is a systematic dismantling of Iran's ability to project power. Their ability to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, their ability to arm Hezbollah and the Houthis and every other proxy army they've been running for years. And Trump, true to form, is not playing coy about what might come next. He says he is weighing a massive follow-on strike, bigger than anything done so far. Tehran, for its part, has rejected a ceasefire. Now, that is a significant data point, my friends. Because a ceasefire is usually what you want when you are getting hit. The fact that they're rejecting it tells you one of two things. Either they are more committed to this than they are to their own survival, which would be consistent with the theology running that regime. Or, and this is the more interesting possibility, they are waiting to see if American domestic politics bails them out, the way it always has before. They have been watching this country for a long time. They watched us pull out of Iraq. They watched the nuclear deal get signed. They watched us pay them that ransom and call it a settlement. They have learned that if you just hold on, eventually American political opinion shifts. The media turns up the pressure. The Democrats start talking about civilian casualties. Some senator goes on CNN and says we need an off-ramp, and then the pressure stops. The question is whether that playbook still works. And I believe with every fiber of my being that it does not work on this president. Now, there are people on the right, serious people, who have concerns about where this goes. What is the end state? What are the conditions for stopping? Those are fair questions, and I am not going to tell you otherwise. But I will tell you this. The alternative, which is the one we have been practicing since 1979, has produced a nuclear threshold Iran, a Middle East on fire, and American sailors being harassed in the Persian Gulf like it is a sport. So forgive me if I am not rushing, no pun intended, to defend the status quo. And Trump has another move here that I absolutely love. He says commercial ships that get hit by Iranian-backed attacks in the region should be reimbursed using frozen Iranian assets. Now that is elegant. That is almost poetic. You fund the attacks, you pay for the damage. The Iranians still have frozen assets sitting in various accounts around the world because of sanctions. Assets they have been screaming about getting back for years. And Trump is essentially saying, every time one of your proxies puts a hole in a tanker, we are going to take it out of your tab. The Iranians, predictably, have issued a warning in response. A warning from the country that is on night 13 of getting its military infrastructure turned into a parking lot. I think we can file that warning under noted. Now, let's talk about Zohran Mamdani. Because this man is the mayor of New York City. And if you have not been paying close attention to New York, you need to start. Because what happens in New York doesn't stay in New York. It becomes a template. It becomes a model. It becomes a talking point. The left takes what works in New York and tries to roll it out everywhere. Mamdani is a democratic socialist. That is how he describes himself. Others, looking at the totality of his statements and his policy positions, have used the phrase full-blown communist. I'll let you decide which label fits. What I will tell you is what he is doing and what he is saying. He went on social media to celebrate a new pied-à-terre tax on New York City second homes valued at $5 million and above. Now, the idea is simple. If you are wealthy enough to have a second home in Manhattan, a pied-à-terre, which is French for foot on the ground, and also French for we're going to tax you into the Hudson River, you are going to pay extra for the privilege. And Mamdani is triumphant about this. He is celebrating it. He is using the language of fair share, that old chestnut, and warning wealthy New Yorkers that there is more where this came from. The online reaction was, shall we say, spirited. Full-blown communist was one of the kinder characterizations. Some wealthy New Yorkers have been rather loudly announcing their intention to leave, which is not a new story. New York has been bleeding high earners for years, but Mamdani seems to view this as a feature, not a bug. Here is the problem with that, though. Those people take their tax money with them. Now, on the same day that Mayor Mamdani is out there celebrating his tax victories, a Jewish man named Moshe Grunhaus is sitting on a Manhattan sidewalk, clutching his chest after being stabbed on the Upper West Side. Multiple credible reports indicate that the attacker shouted Allahu Akbar before or during the assault. The victim was Jewish. There was also an Asian victim in the attack. Mayor Mamdani's response? The NYPD's initial investigation, he says, suggests that mental health may be a factor. Mental health. Now look, I am not a psychiatrist. It is possible. it is theoretically possible that a person can simultaneously have a mental health condition and also be motivated by ideology. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. But when you have an attacker shouting a religious declaration associated with jihadist violence while stabbing a Jewish man, and your first immediate reflexive move is to redirect the entire conversation to mental health, you are not describing what happened. You are choosing a narrative. You are running interference, and everyone watching knows it. This is the same playbook used every single time. Every single time something like this happens in a major American city and the facts point in an inconvenient direction, we get mental health, we get lone wolf, we get anything at all, other than a straightforward account of what appears to have occurred. And I want to be clear, I am not convicting anyone without a trial. The investigation should proceed and let the facts come out. But the mayor of the city shouldn't be in the business of preempting that investigation with convenient alternative framings before the blood is even dry on the sidewalk. New York City elected this man, and the press, by and large, has treated him as a fresh voice, a visionary, an exciting new chapter for urban governance. This is what that looks like. A Jewish man stabbed on the Upper West Side, and the mayor's instinct is to protect the narrative. The all-knowing, all-sensing, all-seeing Maha Ricky said it before and will say it again. You don't actually have to be evil to enable evil. You just have to be reliably committed to looking the other way. All right, the roundup, folks, and we have got good ones today. First up, the DOJ and the non-citizen voter situation. Harmeet Dillon, over at the Justice Department, has announced that DOJ is going to pursue, her words, every single voting violation they find, citing a broken windows strategy after the New Jersey bombshell. Now, for those who haven't been tracking this, New Jersey's voter rolls apparently contain a rather shocking number of non-citizen registrations. The details are still coming out, but the fact that the DOJ is now openly adopting a broken windows approach to election law enforcement is significant. Broken windows, for context, was the policing theory that said, go after small violations aggressively, because small violations unchecked create an environment where larger violations flourish. Rudy Giuliani and Bill Bratton applied it to New York City crime in the 90s, and it worked. And the left hated it then, and they will hate it now. Because the left's entire election strategy for the last decade has depended on the assumption that enforcement is selective, inconsistent, and ultimately toothless. If DOJ actually follows through on this, every single violation, every single one, it changes the calculus for every county election board in America. And I want to see it. Don't tell me, show me. But the fact that they are saying it out loud, publicly, is already different from anything we've seen in a long time. Meanwhile, in Alaska, the state has sent more than 3,000 letters to voters asking them to verify their citizenship ahead of the August primary. 3,000. And a top state elections official says that number is unusually high. Folks, that's the point. That is the point. You start checking and you find out the rolls are not what you thought they were. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Second story in the roundup. The Wisconsin police press conference situation. I want to describe this to you because I think it tells you something important about where we are. In Madison, Wisconsin, police held a briefing about a fatal officer-involved shooting, and a man, a self-described community organizer named Carlos Lamar Dixon, walked up and seized the microphone and went on a rant against Zionism, against colonialism. He reportedly threatened to beat up other attendees, and the Madison police let him. They stood there. They allowed it to continue. Now, these are the same people These are the same institutions that we are told we need to defer to when they tell us how to run our communities. A lunatic takes over a police press conference, and instead of being removed and arrested for threatening people, he is tolerated. Because in Madison, Wisconsin in 2026, the institutional instinct is always to avoid the confrontation, always to appease, always to hope that if you just let the screaming person finish, it'll all calm down. It never calms down. It never calms down. It never, ever calms down. Because every time you let it go, you teach them that it works. Third and finally, the Republican Congresswoman, I am not going to dwell too long here because the story has a fairly easy rebuttal, who suggested we might need illegal aliens in order to maintain a strong military. This came up in the context of a conversation about recruiting numbers. The claim appears to be that recruiting is down, and we may need to look at non-citizen enlistment to fill the gaps. Now, Alex Marlow over at Breitbart has already noted that recruiting numbers are reportedly off the charts right now, which would seem to undercut the entire premise. And here is the thing, folks. If your argument for keeping the border open is that we need illegal immigrants to fight our wars, I want you to sit with that. I want you to actually sit with that argument and ask yourself what it implies about the people making it. It implies they have given up on the idea of Americans wanting to serve. It implies they think American men and women are no longer interested in military service, and we need to import the function. That is not an argument for immigration policy. That is a confession about what they think of the American people. And the American people, as it turns out, are enlisting at record rates. So the premise collapses entirely, and the Congresswoman ought to know better. My friends, what a day! What a remarkable, jam-packed, never a dull moment day in these United States of America. Here is what I want to leave you with. We are at a consequential moment, and I do not say that as a throwaway line. 13 nights of strikes on Iran, a DOJ that is finally treating election law like it actually matters, a mayor in New York who is running what amounts to an ideological experiment on the largest city in the country, and the results are playing out on the sidewalks in real time. A Wisconsin police department that stood there while a man threatened people at a press conference and apparently decided the path of least resistance was the way to go. In all of these stories, there is a common thread. The people who are supposed to be in charge, the people with the institutional authority, the badges, the title, the platform, the mandate, in half these cases, they are either absent or they are actively working against the people they are supposed to serve. And in the other half, you have a president who has decided that he is going to use the authority of his office fully, completely, without apology. Now, you may agree with every decision he makes, or you may not, but the contrast is stark, and the American people, despite everything the drive-by media throws at them, despite every attempt to gaslight them into thinking that this is all chaos and crisis and the end of the world, the American people are smart enough to see it. They always have been. That is the one thing the elites have always underestimated. And it is the one thing they will continue to underestimate right up until the moment it bites them again. I'm Rick LeBow. This has been Rush Hour. Same time tomorrow if they let us back on.